Hey, thanks for tuning in. History isn't just names and dates. It's survival, belief, struggle, and what it really meant to live in another time. We often look back with wonder, but the past was anything but easy. Close your eyes and imagine this. You wake up in a field. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and livestock. You hear no cars, no airplanes, no electricity hums. Your phone has no signal. Not that there's any Wi-Fi here. You reach a dirt road where peasants in woolen cloaks stare at you, whispering in a language that sounds like English but isn't. One points, another makes the sign of the cross. You are not welcome here. Welcome to the Middle Ages, not the fairy tale version of castles, knights, and dragon myths, but the brutal, unsanitized, and deadly reality of medieval Europe. When we say Middle Ages, we're usually referring to the period between roughly 500 AD and 1500 AD, 1,000 years of European history, a time that followed the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and ended with the dawn of the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. But what was life really like? Was it all gallant knights and courtly love? Spoiler alert, no. It was survival. Every single day. And if you, a modern person, were suddenly dropped into the 14th century, odds are, you wouldn't last a week. We've all seen the movies, the brave knight on horseback, the beautiful princess, the great halls and torchlit banquets. It looks noble, it looks epic. But the truth is most people were not knights, they were peasants, serfs, poor, unwashed, hungry. Over 90% of the population worked the land, often under crushing feudal obligations, exposed to the elements, with zero medical care, no legal protection, and no education. What Hollywood shows us is the top 1%. What history shows us is something very different. Let's say you find yourself in England around the year 1350, right in the middle of the 14th century. The Black Death is spreading. The 100 Years' War is ongoing. Most villages are small, isolated, and self-sufficient. Maybe 200 people live here. Homes are made of wattle and daub, wooden frames stuffed with mud, straw, and manure. Thatched roofs leak. There's one room, maybe two. No glass windows, no chimneys, just smoke from the fire pit in the middle of the room. You share this space with chickens, maybe a pig. Your family sleeps on straw with lice. There's no plumbing. Water is fetched from a stream or well. Waste is thrown in the street. You try to stay clean, but there's no soap, no toothbrush, no toilet. Bathing is rare. Not because water isn't available, but because bathing is believed to weaken the body or attract disease. You have a shower every morning? Here, you'll be lucky to wash your feet once a month. You brush your teeth twice a day? That's unheard of. Dental hygiene is non-existent. By 30, most people have lost half their teeth. By 50, if you live that long, you're lucky to chew. You start to feel sick. A fever. A wound gets infected. What do? There are no antibiotics, no ibuprofen. The local doctor is a barber surgeon, someone who cuts hair, pulls teeth, and might also try to drain your blood or drill a hole in your skull to let the demons out. The cure might kill you faster than the illness. You tell people it's just bacteria? You explain how infections work? That could get you accused of heresy. Because knowledge, real scientific knowledge, doesn't exist yet. You're robbed, beaten, accused of stealing a chicken. What happens? You can't call the police. There are none. Justice is local, often carried out by lords, or even mobs. You might be fined, branded, mutilated, or hanged, depending on the mood of the local judge or priest. And if you're accused of witchcraft, you'll be subjected to a trial by ordeal. Maybe you'll be thrown in a river. If you float, you're guilty. If you sink and drown, well, then you were innocent all along. Hunger is constant. Meals are simple. Porridge, bread, maybe a turnip. Meat? Only on feast days, if you're lucky. You can't grow your own food without permission. If your harvest fails, your family starves. There's no grocery store, no backup supply. And what you eat could be dangerous. Moldy grain could cause hallucinations, bad water could spread dysentery, and preserved meat might kill you. Let's talk language. You speak modern English. In 1350, they don't. Middle English is thick, strange, and regional. Words are unfamiliar, accents are heavy. Even if you wrote something down, most people are illiterate. Less than 5% of the population could read, and mostly monks or nobles. Your knowledge, worthless here. Your words, misunderstood or feared. Your home is dry timber. Your roof is straw. Your fire burns day and night, one spark, and the whole village goes up. No fire department, no escape. You're not just poor, you're born poor. And in this world, you'll die poor. Social mobility doesn't exist. You are what you're born. A peasant can't become a lord. A woman can't own land. If you try to rebel or educate others, you're a threat to the order, and that doesn't end well. Most children die before the age of 5. If you make it to adulthood, you're lucky. But your life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years. Injuries get infected. Disease spreads quickly. Childbirth is one of the leading causes of death for women. Work is backbreaking. Everything is dangerous. From your food, to your neighbors, to your lord. Let's say you survive a week, maybe 2. You try to explain the future. You talk about planes, phones, vaccines, computers, electricity. They think you're mad, or worse, possessed. You're burned, drowned, or exiled, because knowledge is not power here. It's a liability. The Middle Ages weren't evil. They were simply what they were, the product of collapse, chaos, faith, and survival. But for a modern human, used to antibiotics, clean water, climate control, and the internet, it's a death sentence. So before you wish for the good old days, remember this. If you stepped back in time to the medieval world, it wouldn't be a fantasy. It would be a fight, every single day, single. Imagine you wake up in a land you don't recognize. There's no GPS, no maps, no roads with signs, just vast open fields, patches of dense woods, and a muddy path that leads somewhere, or nowhere. You're in feudal Europe now, and where you are, geographically, will define the rest of your life. Not just whether you live in a hut or a castle, but whether you live at all. In today's world, if you get lost, you check your phone. You've got Google Maps, satellite views, city directories, and real-time data. In the Middle Ages, you've got none of that. Geography wasn't abstract. It was your lifeline. If you were born near a clean water source, good land, and under the protection of a just lord, you might survive. If not, nature itself could kill you. Let's start with the basics. Most people in medieval Europe lived in rural villages, not cities. Cities were rare and dangerous. In 1300, Paris had about 200,000 people, massive for the time. London had maybe 80,000, but 90% of people lived in small villages of 100, 300 people. So, if you wake up in the Middle Ages, odds are you're in the middle of nowhere. Your village is surrounded by forest. Beautiful, yes, but also full of wolves, wild boar, and bandits. If you wander off the path, you might never be seen again. There are no streetlights, no warning signs. Once night falls, travel is suicide. You're in pitch darkness, unless the moon is out. And even then, fog and storms can trap you. Lost travelers froze to death, fell into rivers, were eaten by wolves, or robbed and killed. So you stay put. You never leave your village unless absolutely necessary. Which means, if you're born in a certain village, that's where you'll live. That's where you'll work. That's where you'll die. The average medieval peasant traveled less than 10 miles from their birthplace in their entire life. It wasn't just custom. It was law. Under the feudal system, peasants were bound to the land. You couldn't leave without permission from your lord. And why would you? Out there was worse than in here. Feudal geography wasn't just natural. It was legal. The land was divided into manors, controlled by lords. Each manor had villages, fields, forests, and peasants. The lord owned everything, including your labor. You'd be given a strip of land to farm. In return, you owed your lord taxes, labor, and obedience. And you couldn't just move to another manor. You weren't a free person. You were part of the land, like a tree or a cow. Well, then you die. If your plot was rocky, flooded easily, or couldn't grow enough crops, too bad. Crop rotation was primitive. Fertilizer didn't exist. If one harvest failed, you begged your lord for grain. And if he refused, your children starved. You can't just move to better farmland. That's not how this world works. Being near water was a blessing and a curse. A river meant irrigation, fish, and clean drinking water. It also meant flooding, malaria, and sometimes war. Some of the worst medieval battles were fought near rivers, because control of water meant control of survival. If your village was downstream of a castle, you could lose your water rights overnight. And if your lord built a dam or diverted a stream to serve his mill, you might be out of luck, or out of clean water entirely. A bad winter today is annoying. Power outages, heating bills, delays. In the Middle Ages, a bad winter was death. If the crops failed due to hail, drought, or flooding, no food. No imports. No emergency relief. No Red Cross. Entire regions starved. The Great Famine of 1315–1317 killed millions. Some records describe cannibalism, not because people were barbaric, but because they had no choice. Imagine a January morning. You wake up in a one-room hut. There's frost inside the walls, the fire has gone out, your water is frozen. You put on your one pair of shoes, if you own any. Maybe you have a cloak, maybe not. You step outside, and your breath freezes, but you still have to work. The fields, or chop wood, or gather water. People died in their sleep from exposure. Children died trying to fetch firewood. There was no insulation, no thermal underwear, and definitely no central heating. Modern people love animals. You go hiking, you hope to see deer. Maybe take a photo of a fox. In medieval Europe, animals were a constant threat. Wolves roamed in packs. Bears still lived in the woods of France and Germany. Wild boars could kill a man. Even farm animals were dangerous. Horses kicked, pigs bit, and if your cow got sick, that was your milk supply gone. No vet, no medication. If you lost your livestock, you might not survive the winter. Then there were the human predators. Outside your village, roads were unsafe. Bandits roamed forests. Some were former soldiers, others desperate peasants. You couldn't carry money safely. You couldn't travel alone. Women especially faced danger, from robbery to worse. There were no police patrols, no courts to report crimes. 2. If someone killed you in the woods, no one would find your body. No one would even look. What about castles? Weren't they safe? Not for you. Castles were built to protect lords, not peasants. In fact, they were often built by taxing the surrounding peasants into deeper poverty. During wars, a lord might retreat into his castle and leave the village to burn. And if your village was near a strategic location, a bridge, a hilltop, a river crossing, then you were more likely to be raided, sieged, or conscripted into battle. Geography wasn't protection, it was target practice. Every village had a church, sometimes the only stone building for miles. They offered some help. Monks often treated the sick, educated children, and kept food stores. But churches were also landowners. They taxed peasants just like nobles did, and their loyalty was to Rome, not the local people. Your village might tithe a tenth of your harvest to the church, even during famine. And if a bishop didn't like your village, excommunication could destroy your economy and your soul. Today, if you die, there's a death certificate, a burial, an obituary, a grave. In the Middle Ages, if you died alone in the woods, no one knew. Your body fed the earth. There were no markers, no records, no search parties. If your village disappeared in a flood or was wiped out by raiders, that's it. History might never know you existed. Because in the medieval world where you were born wasn't just your home, it was your fate. Born near good land? You might live to 50. Born in the wrong place? You're dead by 12. Geography wasn't something you could change. There were no passports, no trains, no job transfers. It was a medieval lottery, and most people lost. In today's world, we take freedom of movement for granted. You can move cities, you can change countries, you can pack up and go. But in the Middle Ages, the earth itself held you in place, sometimes lovingly, often cruelly, and if you had the misfortune of being born in the wrong valley, the wrong marsh, the wrong forest clearing, there was no escape, only survival, if you were lucky. Imagine waking up in a crowded medieval marketplace. You open your mouth to ask for help, and no one understands you. The words come out, but they fall flat. Blank stares, raised brows, then suspicion. You're not just a stranger, you're now something much worse, foreign. We live in a time of translation apps and global English. Even if you travel across the world today, chances are you'll find someone who can understand you. But if you were dropped into the Middle Ages, communication itself could be fatal. The medieval world was multilingual, fragmented, and often hostile to outsiders. Even moving 20 miles could mean crossing into a completely different dialect, or an entirely different language. Let's say you're dropped into England in the year 1300. What language do you speak? English, right? Wrong. The language we speak today, modern English, didn't exist. In 1300, people spoke Middle English, and it was vastly different. The sentence, "I thought I knew you," would have sounded like, "Ich thought ich knew thee." Worse, if you spoke the wrong dialect, say, from the north while in the south, even that could cause confusion. And the ruling elite, they didn't even speak English. After the Norman conquest of 1066, the aristocracy spoke Norman French for over 300 years. Travel to Germany? You'd find dozens of regional dialects, Saxon, Bavarian, Swabian, each barely understandable to the others. Italy? Not a unified country. Just city-states like Florence, Venice, and Naples, each with its own dialect. A Florentine might not understand a Sicilian. France? Same story. Parisian French was only one among many. Occitan in the south, Breton in the west, and dozens more. There was no standard version of any language. No schools to teach it, no dictionaries, just oral tradition, passed from peasant to peasant, distorted like a centuries-long game of telephone. Today, if someone doesn't understand you, they'll probably smile awkwardly and pull out Google Translate. In the Middle Ages, misunderstanding you could cost you your life. Speaking an unknown dialect? You could be accused of being a spy. Using foreign words? That might mark you as a heretic. Fail to answer properly to a guard's demand? He might assume you're a criminal. Or worse, a sorcerer. Religion dominated medieval life, and language was deeply tied to religious practice. The Bible was in Latin, not the local language. Only priests and scholars could read it. If you dared to speak of the scriptures in your own tongue, you could be branded a heretic. In 1382, John Wycliffe translated the Bible into English and was posthumously condemned. His followers, the Lollards, were burned alive for reading the Bible in English. So, imagine trying to explain modern concepts with no context and the wrong language. You might accidentally commit blasphemy without even knowing it. Even if you managed to learn the local tongue, could you write it? Probably not. In 1300, only 5 to 10% of the population could read. Among peasants, the number was closer to 0. Books were handwritten, rare and expensive, worth more than a cow. There were no printing presses until the 15th century. If you tried to show someone a note, a written message, or even modern signage, they wouldn't understand. They couldn't read. And they might think you're using magic symbols. That's how accusations of witchcraft often started. Latin was the language of the church, the law, and the learned. But if you tried speaking Latin to a peasant, you might sound like a demon. If you spoke Latin to a local lord, he might think you're an escaped monk, a spy, or a troublemaker. And if you mispronounced a sacred phrase, you might be accused of mocking God, a crime punishable by torture or death. Strange words scared people, and medieval folk believed in magic deeply. If you muttered to yourself, quoted something scientific, or used unfamiliar phrases, people might think you were casting a spell. Women, especially older women, were often targeted. If you spoke oddly, if you knew herbs, if you prayed in a strange dialect, you might be called a witch. And the punishment for witchcraft: burning, drowning, or worse. By the late 12th century, the Church launched the Inquisition, a campaign to root out heresy across Europe. Inquisitors relied heavily on language. They interrogated suspects for hours, looking for signs of doctrinal errors. If you said the wrong thing, misused a term, or recited a verse incorrectly, they might imprison or execute you, even if it was a simple language mistake. Let's say you're arrested. A town guard thinks your accent is strange. You're dragged before the bailiff. You try to explain, but your speech is too advanced, too foreign. You're now in court, but you don't speak the right version of the local language. You don't understand the charges. You can't defend yourself. There's no translator, no legal representation, just a judge, a scribe, and a sentence. You might be found guilty just because no one understood you. Even if you decided to run, where would you go? Each village speaks a different dialect. Each region has different laws. You can't read signs, maps, or messages. There are no way stations, no multilingual guides. You're completely dependent on the goodwill of others, and suspicion of strangers is universal in medieval society. You speak strangely. You dress oddly. You behave differently. You're either a fool or a threat. The word stranger in the Middle Ages was almost synonymous with danger. Xenophobia wasn't a fringe view. It was the default. Villages were closed communities. Outsiders were often assumed to be thieves, con artists, or enemies. Hospitality existed, but trust had to be earned over years. And since you speak differently, that trust may never come. You've read books. Maybe you even have some knowledge of science, history, or medicine. But if you express that knowledge in strange words, people may not see you as wise. They may see you as threatening. After all, most of their worldview is religious. Your explanations about germs or physics or the stars, that sounds like heresy. Or worse, sorcery. In 1327, a man was executed in Florence for claiming the earth revolved around the sun, not because it was false, but because the church hadn't approved it. Even if you made it to a friendly peasant village, could you blend in? Likely not. Dialect was local. Vocabulary was tribal. You might use words that mean something else, or are considered insults. You may ask for bread and accidentally insult someone's wife. You may offer thanks and be misinterpreted as cursing their harvest. Every interaction becomes a risk. Language was power, but it was also a minefield. Say too little? You seem suspicious. Say too much? You sound dangerous. In a time when rumors of heresy, witchcraft, and treason were enough to ruin a man, your voice could be your executioner. Language is how we connect. But in the Middle Ages, it often divided. If you didn't speak like they did, look like they did, pray like they did, you were alone. Words could heal, but they could also burn bridges, summon suspicion, and doom your soul. In a world this unforgiving, silence might have been safer, but silence too was dangerous. You've made it through the village. You've survived suspicion, but now you're hungry. In the next chapter, we'll explore a danger you thought you understood: food. You look around and see green fields, cattle grazing, and orchards bursting with fruit. You think to yourself, how hard can it be to find food here? But this is the Middle Ages. You're surrounded by food, and yet you are starving. Modern life has conditioned us to believe food is always within reach. A grocery store, a delivery app, a corner shop. But in medieval Europe, food was life and death. Its absence could topple kingdoms. Its scarcity was as common as the sunrise. The irony? Even in fertile regions, starvation was routine. Most people in the Middle Ages were farmers, not by choice, but by necessity. Roughly 85–90% of the population worked the land. But don't let that number fool you. Working the land didn't guarantee you got to eat from it. A peasant family might spend a year growing barley, wheat, and oats, only to give half of it to the local lord as tax. Another portion went to the church. The rest had to last until the next harvest. One bad season could kill a village, and famine was never far. One storm, one early frost, one dry month. That's all it took. Between the 9th and 14th centuries, Europe experienced multiple mini-famines every generation. Then came the worst, the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. 3 years of relentless rain, crops drowned, grain stores rotted, cattle starved. Millions died, parents abandoned children. There are accounts of cannibalism in some regions. This wasn't the apocalypse, this was Tuesday. Let's talk about bread, the cornerstone of medieval diet. The average peasant consumed up to 3 pounds of bread per day. It was fuel, it was culture, it was survival. But what kind of bread? Not the fluffy, yeast-raised loaves you're picturing. Medieval bread was coarse, gritty, and sometimes dangerous. Flour was mixed with bark, beans, or even chalk to stretch it. In hard times, rye was used, which could carry ergot, a toxic fungus that caused hallucinations, seizures, even death. Entire villages went mad from ergot poisoning. People danced uncontrollably in the streets, not from joy but from rot in their nervous systems. Salt wasn't a luxury. It was essential. Without it, meat spoiled, and humans lost vital minerals. But salt was expensive. So expensive it was used as currency in some areas. If you were poor, your food would spoil quickly. You couldn't preserve meat. Your body would suffer. And without salt, your immune system weakened. Disease followed. You might assume medieval people ate lots of meat. After all, there were cows, pigs, chickens. But meat was a luxury. Most peasants ate it only a few times a year, usually at festivals or weddings. Daily meals were gruel, pottage, or thin soup, often made from boiled vegetables, sometimes stretched with old bread or legumes. Protein deficiency was common. Malnutrition was normal. Milk wasn't refrigerated. It spoiled fast. Cheese was aged in ways we'd consider risky today. And unpasteurized milk carried dangerous bacteria. So did poorly cooked meat, unwashed vegetables, and standing water. You couldn't just eat. You had to survive eating. Fruits were seasonal. No imports. No global supply chain. An apple in spring. Impossible. Preserved fruits existed, dried or in honey. But again, only the wealthy had access. For peasants, once winter came, fresh fruit vanished. Scurvy and other deficiency diseases quietly crept in. Microbial knowledge didn't exist. Nobody washed hands. Food preparation was crude. Most cooking happened over open flames, but utensils weren't sanitized. Water came from rivers, often shared with animals or used as latrines upstream. Contaminated water led to dysentery, typhoid, and cholera. If you're from the modern world and your immune system is used to processed food and antibiotics, a single meal might put you in a coma or a grave. The church mandated over 100 fast days per year. On these days, meat, dairy, and often eggs were banned. Fasting was a spiritual discipline, but also a nutritional disaster. Poor peasants, already underfed, had to comply or face religious punishment. The irony? The rich found loopholes. Fish counted as non-meat, so lobster and eel were consumed during fasts, while the poor chewed on bread crusts. Surely the nobles ate well. Yes, but even they suffered. Their diets were rich in meat, sugar, if they could afford it, and alcohol. Vegetables were seen as peasant food. The result? Gout, obesity, and food poisoning. Their feasts were grand, but deadly. Food hygiene didn't discriminate. Rich or poor, if the meat was spoiled, if the bread was tainted, if the cook had dirty hands, you died. In 1347, the Black Death reached Europe. Within a few years, up to 60% of the population was dead. It wasn't just rats and fleas. Malnourished bodies, weakened immune systems, and poor sanitation turned towns into death zones. Doctors wrote about the importance of clean air and balanced humors, but no one connected dirty food or water with illness. Eating wasn't healing. It was a gamble. Let's say you've survived a week in the village. You're hungry. What can you do? You can't buy food. There's no money in your pocket, and coins were rare. You can't beg, because that marks you as a vagrant, and vagabonds were often beaten or imprisoned. You can't hunt, because forests were owned by nobles. Poaching was punishable by death. You can't farm, Land is owned, and the growing season takes months. So what do? You starve. Food was used to control people. Lords controlled who ate what, when, and how much. The church controlled fasts and feasts. Guilds controlled who could sell, cook, or store food. To be hungry was to be at someone else's mercy, and mercy was rare. You, a modern person, wander into this world. Your stomach starts to growl. You ask for food, but your accent is strange. Your clothes are odd. You have no trade, no land, no church membership. You're not fed. You're feared. You try to find edible plants, but you don't know what's poisonous and what's not. You eat wild mushrooms and don't wake up. Let's assume you do find some food. Your body, used to clean kitchens and balanced diets, can't handle the microbes in raw milk, the bacteria in old bread, or the parasites in river fish. Your stomach turns. Diarrhea, vomiting, fever, and without rehydration, modern medicine or antibiotics, you die within days. You were surrounded by farms, but you couldn't eat. You saw orchards, but couldn't taste their fruit. You walked among animals, but could never afford meat. In the medieval world, food was a battle. Every day, every meal. And for most, the battle was lost before it began. Hunger wasn't a crisis. Hunger was normal. Your head aches. Fever blisters rise on your lips. A strange boil forms on your thigh. You seek help, because surely medicine will save you. But this is the Middle Ages. And medicine is about to make things much, much worse. To survive illness in our modern world, you turn to science. Doctors, antibiotics, vaccines, surgery. But in the medieval world, sickness was never just physical. It was spiritual, supernatural, a punishment, a test, or a curse. Medicine wasn't based on biology. It was rooted in theory, tradition, and fear. And if you, a modern person, get sick in this world, the treatment you receive may do more harm than the disease. At the center of medieval medicine was a belief inherited from ancient Greece, the four humors. These were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. It was believed your health depended on the balance of these fluids. Too much of one? You became sick. What was the cure? Simple. Remove the excess by bleeding, vomiting, or purging. So, if you had a fever, the solution wasn't rest or hydration. The solution was leeches or a knife. Bleeding was so common it became a medical reflex. Got a headache? Bleed. Fever? Bleed. Cough? Bleed. Doctors used knives to slice open veins or applied leeches to suck out bad blood. The amount drawn was often absurd, leading to dizziness, weakness, and even death from blood loss. Purging followed the same logic. You'd be forced to drink disgusting herbal mixtures, often containing mercury, arsenic, or animal waste, to make you vomit or defecate violently. Imagine already being sick and having your body further assaulted by medieval treatments. Your chance of recovery? Slim. What if you had seizures, or depression, or schizophrenia? To the medieval mind, those weren't illnesses. They were possessions. You weren't sick. You were being punished by God or inhabited by a demon. Treatment, exorcisms, prayers, whippings, sometimes isolation in a monastery, other times burning. Mental illness wasn't met with compassion. It was met with fear. Let's say you were lucky enough to find a hospital. It wasn't a place for healing. It was a place to prepare for death. Medieval hospitals were more like hospices run by monks or nuns. There were no doctors in the modern sense, just religious caretakers and herbalists. There were no antiseptics, no anesthesia, no pain relief beyond wine and prayer. Beds were shared, water was reused, tools were never sterilized. And if one person had an infectious disease, soon everyone did. If you needed surgery in the medieval world, prepare to suffer. There were no anesthetics. You'd be held down by assistants while the surgeon, often a barber by trade, hacked away with a dull blade. Infection followed almost every operation. Surgeons didn't wash their hands. They didn't know about bacteria. Wounds festered, rotted, and killed. Even simple cuts could become lethal. And the idea of stitching up a wound? Rare. Many believed it was better to let the bad humors drain out. Herbal remedies were common, and some actually helped. Willow bark for pain, garlic for infections, yarrow to slow bleeding. But dosage was a mystery, preparation was guesswork, and many herbs were mixed with animal parts, wine, or even feces. One popular treatment for infection? A cure involving moldy bread, crushed insects, and pig dung. Another remedy for epilepsy, drinking the blood of a freshly killed pigeon. You're not just battling illness now. You're battling the treatment. In the modern world, you understand how germs spread. Hand washing, sterilization, masks, they make sense. But in the Middle Ages, no one knew bacteria existed. Doctors moved from patient to patient without washing. Medical instruments were wiped on their robes. Corpses and the living were kept in the same room. Doctors even diagnosed by tasting a patient's urine. So if you're sick in this world, even with something minor, your exposure to others' filth will probably finish the job. Medicine wasn't just about herbs or humors. It was also about astrology. Doctors consulted star charts to decide the best time to treat your illness. Certain signs were considered unlucky for surgeries. Others dictated when to apply leeches. If Mercury was in retrograde, treatment might be postponed, even if you were dying. So your recovery wasn't based on symptoms or urgency. It was based on the stars. Fate, not fact, ruled your health. Not all healers were monks or doctors. Many were women, midwives, herbalists, or wise women, with generations of knowledge. They often knew more about childbirth, wound care, and plants than the men with degrees. But they walked a dangerous line. If a healing failed, they were blamed. If a baby died, they were accused. If they cured something a priest couldn't, they might be burned as witches. So even the best medical help came with deadly risks. When medicine failed, and it often did, people turned to the church. Sickness was seen as a divine punishment, so healing had to come from God. Pilgrimages to holy sites were common. People drank from sacred springs, touched relics of saints, or slept in holy crypts hoping for a miracle. Many died on the journey. Others returned no better off. Yet this was seen as more effective than visiting a doctor. Now imagine you, a modern person, fall ill in the Middle Ages. You try to explain bacteria, or the need for sanitation. You ask for antibiotics, or clean water, or isolation. You are laughed at, or worse, you're accused of heresy. You claim knowledge not approved by the church. And that makes you dangerous. You might be locked away, or tortured, or executed. Because in this world, ignorance is medicine, and knowledge is death. Even if you find someone kind enough to help you, a good herbalist perhaps, your modern immune system is still at a disadvantage. It has evolved with vaccines, sterile conditions, and access to emergency care. The bacteria on a medieval wound cloth could send your body into septic shock. The water from a village well might give you dysentery. And with no antibiotics, no rehydration therapy, no IV fluids, you die, slowly, painfully. You came here with the confidence of modern science. You believed in cures. You expected recovery. But in the Middle Ages, to be sick was to suffer. And the people trying to help, the priests, the surgeons, the astrologers, they were guessing, hoping, hurting. Because in this world, the only certainty is that medicine doesn't heal. It kills. You've been accused of theft, or heresy, or perhaps you simply angered the wrong noble. In today's world, you'd call a lawyer. You'd expect evidence, a fair trial, a judge bound by law. But this is not today. This is the Middle Ages. And justice is nothing like what you know. The concept of law existed, yes, but it wasn't uniform. It varied by kingdom, village, and ruler. There was common law in England, canon law across Christendom, feudal law enforced by lords, and royal decrees from kings. What was illegal in one region might be acceptable in another. What earned you a fine in one town might get you executed 2 miles away. The law wasn't about fairness. It was about control. As a modern person, you're used to knowing your rights. The right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the right to a fair trial. In the medieval world, you don't have rights. You have obligations. To your lord, to your church, to your king. Break those, or even be suspected of breaking them. And you're guilty until proven innocent. And proving innocence? That's not your decision to make. Anyone can accuse you. A neighbor, a jealous rival, a priest who doesn't like your tone. There's no forensic evidence, no video footage, just suspicion, and suspicion alone can lead to arrest. Accusations of theft, heresy, witchcraft, blasphemy, all are treated with equal gravity. And once you're accused, you don't get to walk free. There's no formal warrant, no Miranda rights. If the village reeve or the Lord's men want you, they take you. By force, if necessary. You're dragged to the local dungeon, not a prison like today, but a dark pit beneath a castle or church. No lights, no heat, just rats and filth. You might not even be told what you're accused of. You simply wait, for days, weeks, even months, in the dark. In many parts of Europe, guilt wasn't determined by evidence. It was determined by ordeal. A literal trial by fire, or water, or combat, with the belief that God would protect the innocent. In a trial by fire, you might carry a red-hot iron a certain distance. If your hand healed cleanly in 3 days, you were innocent. In a trial by water, you'd be thrown into a river. If you floated, you were guilty, because the water rejected you. If you sank, you were innocent. But you might drown before they pulled you out. And yes, that was called justice. If you were noble or lucky, you might be allowed a trial by combat. You or your appointed champion would fight your accuser. Whoever won was deemed truthful. It didn't matter if you were right. It mattered if you were stronger, faster, deadlier. This wasn't truth-seeking. This was a blood sport masked as law. And if you lost, execution awaited, or worse. The church offered an alternative: ecclesiastical court. It was more lenient, sometimes, but it only applied if you were clergy, or could pretend to be. Some defendants memorized Psalm 51 to fake literacy, which was seen as proof of clerical status. But once in church court, you faced canon law. Heresy was the ultimate crime. Denying church doctrine, questioning authority, even owning the wrong book could condemn you. And the punishment? Excommunication, torture, or execution, often handed back to secular authorities to carry out the sentence. You're from the modern world. You ask questions. You speak freely. You doubt. That makes you a heretic, or worse, a witch. You say the earth orbits the sun? Heresy. You say disease comes from germs, not sin? Heresy. You heal someone with an unfamiliar remedy? Witchcraft. And now you're tied to a stake, because thought itself is dangerous. Confessions were the gold standard of guilt, but people didn't confess willingly. So they were made to, through pain. The rack, the thumbscrew, the heretic's fork, the Iron Maiden, instruments designed not to kill but to break. Torture was legal, even routine, and any confession extracted, no matter how desperate or false, sealed your fate. You'll say anything to make the pain stop, but even that won't save you. Punishments were swift and brutal. Prisons weren't long-term. They were temporary. A holding pen before punishment. No appeals, no retrials, no second chances. If you tried to stay silent, to protect yourself, that was interpreted as guilt. Refusing to plead could lead to peine forte et dure, being crushed under heavy stones until you spoke, or died. Yes, crushed, literally, because silence wasn't a right. It was defiance. If you were a noble, the law might bend for you. You could pay fines instead of facing the gallows. You could bribe judges. You could escape punishment entirely. Justice wasn't blind. It bowed to gold and bloodlines. As a commoner, or as a foreigner like you had no such shield. And that makes your survival even more unlikely. Medieval court records still survive, and they're chilling. Children burned for heresy. Women drowned for dancing with the devil. Men hanged for stealing bread. In 1324, a wealthy woman named Alice Kittler was accused of witchcraft in Ireland. She escaped. Her servant Petronilla didn't. She was tortured and burned. Because someone had to suffer. Someone always did. In today's world, you believe in due process, evidence, innocence until proven guilty. But here, your values mark you as naive or dangerous. If you argue too loudly for fairness, you're disruptive. If you question the process, you're suspect. If you speak out against authority, you're guilty. You are not part of the system. You are fodder for it. You believed justice meant truth. But here, justice means obedience. You hoped for mercy. But here, mercy is weakness. You wanted fairness, but fairness died centuries before you arrived. You stood accused in a world that didn't care whether you were right. And now you are gone, silenced, branded, burned. Because in the Middle Ages, justice isn't blind. It's brutal. You're hungry. You expect a meal. Warm, filling, familiar. But this is no modern kitchen. There are no fridges, no preservatives, no hygiene standards. This is a medieval household. And the food you're about to eat might kill you. For most of the medieval population, eating wasn't a pleasure. It was survival. And survival meant constant risk. The average peasant didn't eat 3 square meals. They ate whatever was available, which often meant poorly stored, nutrient-lacking or rotting food. And that's if there was anything to eat at all. Crop failure was common. A harsh winter, a late frost, or too much rain could wipe out the entire harvest. And there was no food surplus, no global trade, no shipping in grain from another country. If your local harvest failed, you starved. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 affected all of Europe. Crops failed, cattle died, people ate bark, acorns, even corpses. Yes, cannibalism. In your modern world, that seems unthinkable. In theirs, it was reality. Bread was the cornerstone of every meal. But it wasn't the soft, golden loaf you imagine. It was coarse, dense, often gritty, full of ground-up bran, weeds, or even powdered stone used to stretch flour, and it could kill you. Why? Because rye bread, common across Europe, was often infected with a fungus called ergot. Ergot produces hallucinations, vomiting, seizures, and in severe cases, death. Entire villages suffered. Outbreaks of St. Anthony's fire, ergot poisoning, mistaking it for curses or divine punishment. You'd eat it thinking it was food. It was a toxin. You're used to fresh meat, safely refrigerated. In the Middle Ages, there was no refrigeration. Meat spoiled quickly, even in winter. If you were poor, you rarely had meat. If you were rich, you had more. But it wasn't safer. It was preserved with salt, hung until moldy, or boiled beyond recognition. Sometimes the rot was so advanced that people used strong spices just to cover the smell. Not for taste, for masking decay. And food poisoning? That was just part of life. Catholics observed fast days, often 2 or 3 per week, where meat was forbidden, so fish became essential. But if you lived inland, fresh fish was rare. You ate preserved fish, dried, salted, or pickled. Cod, herring, and eels dominated the diet. The preservation wasn't always effective. You'd chew through a mouthful of brine-soaked flesh, and pray it didn't make you sick. Pottage was the mainstay of the poor, a stew, of grain, water, and whatever scraps could be found. Roots, nettles, beans, bits of bone, anything edible went in. There was no standard recipe. It simmered all day in a pot blackened with years of soot, and hygiene, not a concern. Spoons were communal, bowls rarely cleaned, and the pot itself might harbor bacteria, mold, or parasites. You'd eat it because it was all there was, not because it was safe. No one washed. Hands before cooking. Most didn't wash them after relieving themselves. Water wasn't always clean. Wells could be contaminated. Streams ran thick with sewage and animal waste. Grain was often stored in barns that also housed livestock, attracting rats and fleas. And no one refrigerated leftovers. They simply reheated yesterday's stew, again and again, for days. You're used to sanitation. In the medieval world, contamination was inevitable. You wouldn't just get food poisoning. You'd get worms. Tapeworms, roundworms, flukes. They lived in poorly cooked pork or beef, and once inside you, they stayed. They fed off your body, your nutrients, your blood. Chronic diarrhea, vomiting, fatigue, stunted growth. And if the infestation grew severe, it could kill you outright. Salt preserved food. It kept meat and fish from rotting. But it wasn't easy to come by. It had to be mined, boiled, or traded, and was so valuable, it was sometimes used in place of currency. Peasants rarely had enough. Without salt, preservation failed. And even when you did have salt, too much could cause dehydration and kidney problems. Balance was a luxury. Most people didn't get that choice. The medieval world had no concept of food safety. People often confused edible plants with toxic ones. Hemlock, deadly nightshade, foxglove. All could be mistaken for herbs or greens, and they weren't always labeled or avoided. A poorly informed cook might toss one into the stew pot. One wrong leaf, and the whole family died. You're thirsty, so you drink water, but that's a mistake. Most water was unsafe, full of bacteria, feces, and parasites. So people drank ale, low-alcohol beer brewed daily, even children. But if the brewing process failed, it spoiled or turned toxic. Wine was reserved for the wealthy, mead if you were lucky. But even those could be tainted. A single bad drink could end your life. You think nobles ate well. In some ways, yes, but not wisely. Their diets were imbalanced. Too much meat, too much fat, too many spices. No fresh vegetables, few fruits, constant overeating. Diseases like gout, obesity, kidney stones, and foodborne illness were rampant among the elite. They ate extravagantly, but not healthily. And their meals weren't safe, just excessive. Vitamins, unknown, protein, a mystery, calories, never heard of them. The idea of a balanced diet didn't exist. People ate what was available, not what was healthy. And the result? Widespread malnutrition. You'd lose your strength within weeks. And in a world without medicine, weakness was a death sentence. There were no forks, not until the 11th or 12th century in some regions. People ate with dirty hands, shared spoons, and drank from the same cups. Plates were wooden, or trenchers, flat loaves of bread used as dishes, then eaten or thrown to dogs. Nothing was sanitized, nothing was sterile. You'd get sick, and never know why. Among the wealthy, overeating led to vomiting, not as an accident, but on purpose. They used feather quills to induce it, so they could continue feasting. This wasn't rare, it was normalized. An endless cycle of gluttony and purge, a nightmare for your modern digestive system. Every bite you take is a question. Will this nourish me or kill me? There's no ingredient list, no nutrition label, no best before date. You can't trust your senses. Spoiled food was sometimes all you had. And even if it looked fine, it could be filled with parasites, toxins, or bacteria. You wouldn't just get sick once. You'd get sick constantly. You crave a simple meal. But the table holds danger. Bread that hallucinates, meat that rots, water that kills. There is no choice, no safety, no nutrition. Only hunger, and the desperate hope that the next bite isn't your last. Because in the medieval world, food is never just food. You're feeling warm, feverish. A headache pulses through your skull. Maybe it's just fatigue, or maybe it's the end. In your world, this would mean a doctor's visit, a diagnosis, and some pills. But here, in the medieval world, your symptoms are a mystery. And your fate? Likely sealed. Today, medicine is grounded in biology, chemistry, and evidence. In the medieval era, it was grounded in superstition, astrology, and the four humors. Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. These were believed to control every aspect of health. Fever, That meant your yellow bile was too hot. Coughing blood? Too much phlegm in the lungs? The solution? Balance the humors, with bleeding, leeches, vomiting, or purging. Not science. Rituals, guesswork, often worse than the disease itself. One of the most common treatments for nearly everything, from headaches to plague, was bloodletting. Physicians believed that illness stemmed from an imbalance of fluids, so draining blood would restore equilibrium. They used knives, needles, or leeches to open veins and drain pints at a time. No gloves, no antiseptic, no understanding of blood loss. Patients grew weak, infections festered, some bled to death. But to the medieval mind, it was considered healing. To you, it would be a death sentence. You imagine a physician in a white coat. In medieval Europe, a doctor wore robes, if you could find one. Physicians were educated in ancient Greek and Roman texts, not science. They rarely saw patients. That was for barber surgeons, who doubled as tooth pullers, bloodletters, and battlefield medics. And for the poor, there were no physicians. You saw a local herbalist, midwife, or monk, if anyone at all. The tools were crude, the knowledge limited, the results devastating. The most basic truth of disease, that microbes cause illness, wasn't discovered until the 1800s. In the Middle Ages, people believed disease came from bad air, called miasma. They carried herbs or wore long-nosed masks to filter the corruption in the air. They didn't understand bacteria, viruses, contagion. Which means no isolation of the sick, no sanitation of wounds, no sterilization of instruments. Hospitals were often breeding grounds for disease. You went in sick, and likely left in a cart. 1347. A ship arrives in Sicily carrying rats, fleas, and the plague. Within 5 years, half of Europe's population was dead. Victims developed high fever, swollen lymph nodes, and blackened limbs. Death followed within days. No one knew why. Theories blamed the stars, God's anger, or poisoned wells. Doctors wore terrifying beaked masks filled with flowers and herbs. They thought it would ward off the miasma. Nothing worked. The dead were so numerous they were buried in mass graves, sometimes alive. You think COVID was bad? The Black Death killed millions with no warning, no cure, and no understanding. In your time, a cut is nothing. A trip to urgent care, maybe some antibiotics. In the medieval world, a simple scratch could kill you. Bacteria from soil, from rusty tools, from human skin, they all led to infections. Tetanus, sepsis, gangrene. There was no soap, no antiseptics, no antibiotics. Your body had to fight alone, and it often lost. For medieval women, the most dangerous thing they could do was give birth. No prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives relied on herbal knowledge, but if labor was complicated, death was likely. For the mother, the baby, sometimes both. Stillbirths, infections, postpartum hemorrhage, all common, all untreatable. 1 in 3 women died giving birth, and that was considered normal. In a modern hospital, you're surrounded by trained professionals. Here, you're surrounded by candles, herbs, and hope. You wake up with a high fever, muscle aches, chills. You think it's the flu, and it might be. But without fluids, electrolytes, or antivirals, your body will dehydrate. Your fever climbs, you start hallucinating, you can't drink. And soon, your organs begin to shut down. Something you'd survive easily today could kill you in the Middle Ages. Your tooth aches. It's abscessed, pus-filled, throbbing, and spreading infection to your jaw. There's no dentist, no Novocaine, no root canal. The solution? Rip it out. Barber surgeons used pliers, often rusty, to pull teeth without numbing. Screaming was expected. Dying from infection afterward? Also expected. Your smile isn't just ruined. Your life might be. Anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, seizures. None of these were recognized as medical conditions. They were seen as sinful, demonic possession, or divine punishment. Those suffering from mental illness were beaten, exiled, or locked away. Some were burned, others bled, many simply ignored. No therapy, no compassion, just fear. You're stabbed in the leg, not a fatal blow by today's standards. But now, the wound festers, dirt, sweat, animal feces, rust. There are no antibiotics, no sutures, no painkillers. If you're lucky, the limb is amputated. If not, sepsis kills you. And even the cleanest wounds often turned gangrenous. You didn't recover from injury. You endured or died. Diseases like leprosy, tuberculosis, and syphilis were incurable. Leprosy deformed the face and limbs. Victims were cast out to leper colonies. Syphilis, widespread by the late Middle Ages, caused madness and organ failure. There were no gloves, no condoms, no understanding of transmission. Diseased individuals roamed freely, and so did their pathogens. Desperate for cures, people turned to herbalists, potion sellers, and magical talismans. Many herbs worked, some didn't. Some were outright toxic. Foxglove for the heart. If used incorrectly, it kills. Belladonna, for pain. It can induce hallucinations and death. Mercury was used to treat syphilis. Arsenic for infections. You might survive the disease, only to die from the cure. The church had enormous power, and it taught that illness was often God's punishment for sin. Repentance, pilgrimages, and prayer were seen as essential to healing. Doctors were seen as second to faith. Hospitals run by monks prioritized your soul over your body. The spiritual came first. The physical? That was left to fate. Women who knew too much about healing were feared. A midwife who saved too many births? A woman with too many herbal cures? She was accused of witchcraft. Hundreds were executed, burned, drowned, or hanged. Their knowledge died with them, and medicine regressed even further. No microscopes, no clinical trials, no vaccines, no germ theory. Diseases were rampant, untreated, misunderstood. And you? You're a modern person, dependent on pills, clean water, antiseptics, none of which exist here. A cold might kill you. A scratch might infect you. A headache might be a tumor, but no one could tell. You'd be afraid of your own body. Every day. The average lifespan was around 30 to 40 years, and that includes the wealthy. Child mortality was high, war was constant, disease was everywhere. Most people didn't die peacefully, they wasted away. And when death came, it came without dignity. No hospice, no morphine, no peace, only pain and prayers. In the medieval world, sickness wasn't rare. It was normal. There were no doctors as you know them, no hospitals you'd recognize, no hope of understanding the enemy within. Disease always won. And for someone like you, it would win quickly. You find yourself in a village. The sun sets and shadows lengthen. You're tired, hungry, but more than that, you're scared. Because in the medieval world, law and order were luxuries, not guarantees. Unlike today's sprawling police forces and legal institutions, medieval law was patchy, localized, and often brutal. Kings ruled from distant castles. Their writs rarely reached the furthest hamlets and villages. Instead, law enforcement was left to lords, sheriffs, or local militias, men who might be corrupt, incompetent, or hostile. You could not count on protection. Robbers, bandits, and rogue knights prowled roads and forests. Traveling was one of the deadliest risks. The roads were infested with bandits waiting to rob, maim, or kill travelers. Highwaymen operated with near impunity, often under the protection of corrupt local nobles. Carrying gold or valuables, you might be a target for violent robbery, or worse. Many never reached their destinations. And if you did, the local lord might refuse to help. The feudal system meant that justice was personal and arbitrary. Your lord held the power of life and death over his tenants. Disputes were settled not by impartial courts, but by manorial courts, where your social rank often decided the outcome. Commoners had little recourse against nobles or wealthy merchants. If you accused a powerful man, expect retaliation. Justice often took the form of blood feuds. If someone wronged you or your family, you had two choices: seek peace or revenge. Revenge was brutal and unending. Generations could be locked in cycles of violence. Murder, arson, ambush, all common. The law couldn't protect you. The medieval justice system was more theatrical than fair. If accused of a crime, you might face a trial by ordeal, fire, water, or hot iron, to prove innocence. Survive the fire, and you're innocent. Fail, and you're guilty. Or, for the nobility, a trial by combat could decide your fate. Two men fought to the death or submission, with the winner deemed righteous. No evidence, no witnesses, no legal defense. Just luck, strength, and brutality. The concept of a police force was non-existent. Criminals were pursued by local militias or by hired bounty hunters. But these men could be corrupt or violent themselves. Prisons weren't for punishment but for holding, until trial or ransom. Conditions were horrific: overcrowded, filthy, and deadly. To extract confessions or information, torture was routine. The rack, the thumbscrew, the Iron Maiden, all instruments of pain. Confessions, extracted under torture, were accepted as truth. Many innocent people died under these methods. Execution was a public event designed to instill fear and obedience. Hanging, beheading, burning at the stake, all common. Crowds gathered, cheering or jeering as justice was dispensed with brutal finality. Punishments were often disproportionate. A theft might cost you your hand. A minor crime, your life. Women fared even worse in the justice system. They had little legal standing and were vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. Accused of witchcraft? You faced certain death. Rape victims often faced blame themselves. Their voices were largely ignored. The church had its own courts, separate from secular authorities. These courts dealt with moral crimes, heresy, blasphemy, adultery. Punishments ranged from fines to excommunication, or worse. Heresy was punishable by death. The church wielded immense power. Kings tried to impose order by appointing sheriffs and judges. Magna Carta, 1215, was a step toward limiting royal abuses, but justice was still unevenly applied. For peasants, justice was often an empty promise. Without allies, protection, or wealth, you were vulnerable. A petty theft could escalate into a fatal encounter. You might be falsely accused and executed without trial. Your village might be razed by marauding armies or rival lords, and there was no system to appeal or escape. Medieval people had few rights but many duties. You owed taxes, labor, and loyalty to your lord. Failing to pay or fulfill obligations invited punishment. There was no welfare, no social safety net. Peasants bore the brunt of lawlessness. They were often caught between noble disputes, bandits, and the lawless. Violence was a daily threat, yet they had no weapons or means to defend themselves. Some survived by aligning with powerful patrons, but that meant subservience and vulnerability to betrayal. Loyalty was currency. Constant wars meant lawlessness was worsened. Civilians suffered most. When famine or plague struck, there was little government aid. Law enforcement focused on maintaining order, sometimes brutally. Desperation drove people to crime and rebellion. Over centuries, law and justice improved. But during the medieval period, you'd be lucky to see fairness. In the medieval world, law was a fragile shield, easy to pierce, and often wielded as a weapon. Without protection or power, you were prey to violence, injustice, and death. In this lawless land, survival meant more than strength. It meant luck. And sometimes, none at all. You've journeyed through the dark and brutal reality of medieval life. From disease to war, from lawlessness to famine. You've seen why survival was a daily gamble, with odds stacked heavily against you. But as the Middle Ages drew to a close, around the late 15th and early 16th centuries, many hoped for a new era of safety and progress. Feudalism, the system that had shaped medieval society for centuries, began to unravel. Kings and queens centralized power, creating stronger nation-states. This shift promised greater law and order, but it also meant new forms of conflict. Standing armies replaced feudal levies, and monarchs demanded new taxes to fund wars. The common people were caught in the crossfire. The 100 Years' War had already devastated much of Europe, but the late Middle Ages saw new conflicts. The Wars of the Roses in England, the Italian Wars, and countless localized rebellions. Soldiers became more professional, but also more brutal. Sieges destroyed towns, armies pillaged villages. Civilians were often targets. Gunpowder revolutionized warfare. Cannons smashed castle walls that had stood for centuries. Musket-wielding infantry replaced armored knights. But these advancements also meant more destructive battles and higher civilian casualties. The once glorious medieval battlefield became a more deadly, chaotic place. Cities grew in size and importance during this time. But with greater population density came greater risk of disease outbreaks. The plague returned in waves. Sanitation remained poor. No medicine existed to stop these recurring epidemics. Despite technological and agricultural advances, famine was still common. Bad harvests, climate fluctuations, and war disrupted food supplies. Millions faced hunger and malnutrition, weakening their bodies against disease and hardship. For the poor, survival remained fragile. The late Middle Ages also brought religious upheaval, corruption in the church, the rise of heretical movements, and the early stirrings of the Protestant Reformation shook European societies. Religious wars, persecution, and witch hunts caused fear and death. In some regions, faith was a source of hope. In others, a cause of violence. New monarchs sought absolute control. They centralized judicial systems but often used power ruthlessly. Peasant revolts were crushed harshly. Legal reforms sometimes improved order but rarely protected the poor. For many, justice remained a distant dream. The late Middle Ages sparked the age of exploration. European powers began expanding overseas, but for those left behind, exploration meant displacement, forced labor, and new forms of exploitation. The world was growing, but for many medieval people, life's hardships only multiplied. The Renaissance began to awaken new ideas. Scholars rediscovered ancient texts. Art and science flourished. But these changes took time. Most people were still peasants, bound to the land and its dangers. Knowledge spread slowly, and superstition endured. Survival, in the late Middle Ages, was no guarantee of safety or comfort. You might live through plague, famine, or war, but you still faced a lifetime of hardship, disease, and insecurity. Your children's survival was uncertain. Your community could be destroyed overnight. The medieval world was ending, but its shadows lingered. Poverty, disease, injustice, and violence didn't vanish. They morphed into new forms, carried forward by social and political struggles. For the average person, the hope of a better life remained distant. As the 16th century dawned, the world began to change. Medicine, science, law, and governance evolved. But these changes came slowly and unevenly. The medieval era's legacy was one of struggle and resilience, a reminder of how precarious survival once was. You've seen why surviving the medieval times was not just a matter of strength or courage. It was a battle against disease, starvation, violence, and fear. An existence where every day could be your last. But it was also a world of endurance, adaptation, and the human will to live. The Middle Ages may be behind us, but their lessons remain. Remember them. Learn from them. Because the price of survival is often higher than we imagine.